Great to have you with us. Thank you.
Hi everybody. It was very strange speaking to a mic to a small room, but I understand why. I think a couple of things that are helpful to know. We're still going to on a time and end at 1:45, so it'll be an abbreviated session that I want to do quite interactively, because at the end of the day, probably a whole lot of information in your guys' heads. And so to start off, I would like to do two things. I'd love to hear from you guys in the last couple of days what's one standout thing you've heard when it comes to raising leaders, building teams. That'll help me understand how you think and process a little bit. So a couple of you can throw those out in a second and you can start thinking now. And then secondly, I'll tell you the 2-minute version of my story. Afterwards, I'll throw out a few key thoughts and let's actually let you guys shape it. You can tell me where there's a bit of appetite to chat about. The good news is you would have heard some of the stuff from Ryan around organisation and organisational leadership, and you get to hear from Louise tomorrow, who I co-lead the staff here with. So anything that we don't get to, I can send through to her, and there is another session on it tomorrow. But I do know what it's like in the graveyard shift, so let's keep it highly conversational, highly energetic, and get out of here in just over half an hour. So cool.
Cool. Amazing.
Great. One thing you've picked up around leadership and building teams that's been the standout for you. Check it out.
You don't need permission if you've got a commission.
And it runs as well. That's good. That sounds like rugby. Classic race.
That's exactly.
Cool. Well, we learned one thing. That's good.
I'd be surprised where your next leader comes from.
Ah, that's good.
That's big, yeah.
Wow. Who is that?
Rugby.
Rugby as well. That's 2 Wrigley. They asked me to keep score. They sent me a text to.
I'll find one from Ryan.
Or Steve, the forgotten man of this conversation so far, you know? No, just kidding. Anything else?
I think probably being intentional with guys,
Okay.
with leaders, spotting potential and then being intentional.
Yeah, it's great. Doesn't happen by accident, eh? Lots? Nothing?
There has. It's been so much.
I thought you were starting to say something, which is why I asked you. I wasn't picking on you.
I mean, Ryan was just talking about in the Big Five thing, raising up leaders, and he said there's just no substitute for just spending time with people. That was his big one. He's like, you can do the trainings and
Totally.
teaching moments, and there'll be stuff, but it's actually that you're just people. You know, people caught more than taught.
It's yeah, totally. That's good.
And also, I think the current theme was give people assignment before appointment. Was another thing. So assignments or list for free appointment.
Yeah, that's good.
A lot of baggage.
There was a GLS session a couple of years ago about short-term but meaningful assignments. That are great tests for young leaders. I think it's good.
I think when starting a team or choosing people to join your team,
Yes.
the need for chemistry, not just
Okay.
competency.
Someone did the 4 C's.
Yes.
This is why I asked. I've got to scratch that off my list. That's great. Who talked about those?
Right.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Keep going. One more. This table over here is lagging at the back. Come on. Move on.
Steve also spoke about how it's important to lead yourself, and a good way to do that is to learn to follow others.
Yeah, very good fellowship. That's great. Fantastic. All right, a quick version of my story. Less to tell you the story, but more just hopefully it gives you a bit of a framework for questions you can ask later. So in my matric year, I was on my way to studying a BCom. I loved the business entrepreneurial side of things and got interrupted by a call from God and a phone call from Big Paul Jensen, a friend of mine who was about to end his chemical engineering degree, and phoned me and said, come be an intern for Grace Family Church in Durban, which was great. So I did that for a year, got to raise my own salary of 780 Rand a month, had to ask people to give me money to be able to fill my tank, which was really fun. So I deep ended with like tech stuff, video, photo, AV, sound, learning all that sort of thing, and got to serve in youth and young adults ministry, which was really great. That then turned into a career to becoming the technical director for Grace Family Church. Moving from 300 or 400 people in a school hall to 4 or 5 years later, a 1,000-seat auditorium in Umhlanga, where everything just upgraded hugely. And I've always been a little bit of a generalist, more than a specialist. I could do, that's like good excuse for saying can't really do anything well, but kind of hard to get rid of. So I eventually found myself growing out of my role and going, we need specialists. We need like a proper sound person, a proper video person to be able to take this new thing forward. And so I felt God moved me on. Living behind Grace Family Church, where I guess I learned my love for reaching the lost and for doing whatever we can to get the gospel into people's hearts and minds. Went overseas for a couple of years, and while I was there, my good friend Ross Roger and I stayed in touch. Ross was the youth and young adults guy at Grace, and we talked about planting a church together one day. And that day arrived when there was an opportunity, not for a pure plant, but for us to take about 20 of our mates from Grace Family Church, think very seeker-sensitive, Andy Stanley, Willow Creek kind of feel, to go and merge with a congregation of about 40 people that came from old Olive Tree, which is Messianic thinking, so like a love for the Jewish culture and people, and a desire to see that message preached and actually to reach and pastor Jewish people. So very, very different, and that had kind of gone from high vision, fast growth over the next few years to not really having a leader, and some quite hard internal splits and stuff like that. And ultimately they held onto the culture of like doing Jewish dances from the 80s and singing Jewish songs, but not really keeping up with what was going on, so it was a little bit outdated. And so you can imagine a seeker-sensitive group of 20 and 30-year-olds jumping together with this kind of rich tradition of people who'd stayed around out of faithfulness and prayerfulness, really, and we got to plant a new church against all odds that was called Olive Tree still. That was really, really interesting. And so there was 3 of us on staff to start. Ross, the pastor, his wife, Amy, the kids' church person, who Ross took the pastor's salary and cut it in half, paid Amy out of that. Amy gave up her salary to give to me so I could come back from the UK. And so I started on this like exciting little mission. Let's make this thing happen. Let's live with this dream of wanting to be a city-reaching church that's missional, that's charismatic, that's relevant to the culture we find ourselves in. And so Ross led the church, and I got to run it. Which, when there's 3 of you and about 100 people, it's everything. You finance, you worship ministry, you kids church, you HR and ops and tech and all that sort of stuff. And so I got to play a little bit more of that generous role. And then it grew kind of fast. So within a couple of years, we had maxed out 4 Sunday services, and we're starting to see around about 1,000 adults and about 8 or 10 staff members then. I was leading a staff of 10 for about a year as the staff head, and after a year had to have an intervention with every other person on staff who wanted to complain about me with an external mediator. So that was not a very good experience of me leading a staff, so I learned a lot of lessons that hopefully out of my pain you may not have to learn them. Then Olive Tree became, we went to a city-reaching conference in Joburg that some of you may have been at, and Tim Keller was here, and we realized that God was doing the same thing in us that he was doing in a whole lot of churches around the world, Common Ground being one of them, which is where I think I met Ryan and Riggs, PJ Smythe and God First being another one of them. PJ was actually Ross, my friend's teacher at school, and so there was a connection there, and suddenly we found this ground of going, hey, we actually want to be a multi-site church, we want to be a city-reaching church, and all of us were on the same journey, which is where I started learning a whole lot from Ryan and Common Ground particularly. And then when we started to come to the end of our Olive Tree journey, Christy and I, we had processed it with the elders and leadership there, felt like God was going to move us on. We were at that point 4 multi-sites, about 30 staff, and probably about 2,500 people regularly coming through Olive Tree in KZN. And then God moved us on here and opened doors through Ryan and Common Ground. So where my role now is to help Lou lead the staff here, and then I'm involved in some of the projects like preaching collab stuff and the communications of Common Ground and all that sort of stuff. So that's a quick story. Hopefully you're kind of pegging where you may be at or what might be helpful to ask. I think I'm going to throw out a few tasty one-liners, and maybe you can kind of bank where you think it'll be helpful to talk around. So thought number 1 that we could chat about. Most of you are in the room because you probably feel called to Christian leadership or ministry, preaching and vision casting. Not a lot of you are signing up to be bosses or employers, but that's actually a reality of every church. And so what do we do with that? I feel called to ministry and to lead, but now am I going to get distracted by being a boss or an employer? So not a lot of us think that way. The second thing we could chat about a little bit, most people, including your staff that join, are most comfortable with the size of church when they join. They think it's the right way to do church. So when we were 100 people, the staff we brought on thought that's how you do church. And later on when we were 3,000 people, and guys joined at staff number 28, 29, like that's how you're supposed to do church. How do you coach people along that growth journey? And that's probably true for coaching your elders, coaching your leaders, coaching your staff along the way. How do you prep for growth? Third kind of angle, as we grow, at some point you've got to make an intentional decision on the kind of church we're going to be when it comes to a combination of what volunteers and staff do. What should staff actually do? What should volunteers actually do? Are we staff driven? Are we volunteer driven? Food for thought. Outside of your elders, I think your staff are probably your most influential people in your church, that either help you get to the vision through the strategy and the culture, or they handbrake it. Outside your elders, I think staff are actually your next most crucial bit of people. And then last thought here, every organization, and the church is an organization, we just want it to be Jesus' organization, needs vision, strategy, and culture. And most of them have a compelling vision, but a lot of them get tripped up by not having a strategy to get to the vision. Or even churches that have a great vision and a great strategy have an unhealthy culture, and the culture will eat the strategy for breakfast, and we won't get to the vision that's really important. And so we can talk about any one of those 5 things. I'd love to start with thoughts or questions, or what kind of stands out to you guys the most.
So I'd like to talk more about staff and volunteers. You know,
Okay.
how do you balance that? How do you manage that?
Great.
What should staff do? What should volunteers do?
Can you give me the highlights package of where your church is at now, if it's not an overshare?
So we are a single site church, hoping to
Normal church.
normal
Local
church, hoping to plant into St. Helena Bay. In the beginning of next year, we have 2 services, one Afrikaans, one English,
Okay.
multicultural, aiming at being an authentic New Testament church.
How many full-time staff?
10.
Okay. And how many congregation members will come in the course of a month?
Over the course of a month, well, our regular Sunday attendance is just below 400, so there's about 500 members.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So my thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear some of yours because I don't have all the answers. I tend to see churches take one of 2 approaches. They don't always take it intentionally. They don't always choose it. It sometimes happens by accident. Maybe, as we said earlier, we don't drift into the best things when we're not doing it on purpose. But one approach is, hey, we're a volunteer-driven church. We believe that we're a volunteer organization. That's the priesthood of all believers. And so we are prepared to grow and move at that speed. And if that means going a little bit slow and a little bit more steady because that's what we believe is our conviction, then when we staff to supplement that. Right? So volunteers do the ministry, they do the mission, they do the admin, sometimes you got a guy or a lady who's a CFO out there, and we get them to do the counting, and we think that that's servant-hearted and fantastic. So that's one approach. The other approach is that we actually think we're a staff-driven church. In other words, whenever we see gaps that need to be filled, we can fill it faster and easier by staffing into it. And so the staff does most of the admin, some of the mission and ministry hopefully, but volunteers will then tend to focus mostly on pastoral stuff and ministry stuff in their workplace, in their life groups or small groups or community groups that they lead. And of course you can get iterations of that, but do you see like the kind of subtle difference about where does the actual doing of the stuff lie? And I don't particularly want to make an argument for either one. I think you can, I just hope that you choose. We think that we want to be this out of conviction and vision and the strategy that we have, and don't just kind of drift into it. And so similar to that, I've observed and interacted with a whole lot of churches, and also they fall into sometimes these 2 camps and somewhere in between. One is the very ministry-heavy model, where you kind of hire into high-capacity pastors that are going to connect with huge amounts of people, and you'll maybe have the elder in charge of this, the elder in charge of that, and volunteers do the nitty-gritty. So there isn't always high value on excellence and production and slickness. It's like, no, we're about people, so we pay people biggish salaries to be able to pastor, and then we let volunteers do nitty-gritty stuff. The other contrast is the logistical hire, which is, we want to empower our marketplace elders and our life group pastoring, and we trust that that's actually a normal part of their Christian life. And so we tend to hire a little bit more into run-of-the-mill stuff, so that we don't have a CFO taking up the offering or sending the emails, whatever. They can actually focus in on the stuff that they're gifted and called to. Thoughts or questions around that? Some good brains in the room here. I'd love you to help shape it.
like Life Fellowship, would it be like a volunteer-driven church at the moment because of the staff?
What do you think, Diva?
Yeah, in terms of how would you advise in terms of still in early stages? There are two elders who are helping,
Yes.
but how would you, if let's say you want to be volunteer-driven, how to do that intentionally? You know, what are the things
Yeah.
that you?
So I think at the very simplest level, it's a question of if we, for example, are going, there's these critical gaps that we think to make a New Testament church happen. Worshipping God and whatever the things, next gen ministry to be able to reach the whole family. Does your brain go, we need to pay someone to take care of that so we can get on with the ministry, or actually we want to raise people up out of the congregation? The second one is a volunteer-driven model, the first one is a staff-driven model. And again, I don't think it's necessarily right or wrong. And you may pivot. So you guys are in a unique situation where you're still planting and you've got kind of the support of 8 or 9 other churches with resources, with staff, with people that they can lend. And so that, in that way, it can maybe be supplemented by people, staff for a while, and then over time grow into a volunteer-led organization. If that's the vision, if that's the strategy to best achieve your vision, it may in that context be, it may in your context be, actually that's not necessarily the best way. I would say, I think volunteer-led slower, and that slower is not worse. Is there a grace from God at the moment where He's just adding to our number daily, and we're just seeing so many ridiculous salvations and people added that it's actually worth keeping up with that fastness and almost adding later? Or are you building slow and steady, and as you do that, God goes, great, you've been faithful, and then He adds? Which is the right one? It really depends, because that's God building His church, you know? Mm-hmm. So I would hate to see one as bad and one as good. Yeah. I think you can probably make an argument for both. As long as, at the end of the day, are people becoming who they're meant to be in Christ? Are they consumers or contributors? Some of those kind of key questions.
The question...
Sorry, behind you.
Yeah. So, when do you, I mean, at a point of growth, are you choosing to hire more generalists who can do a bit of everything, so you've got more muscle in your team? When does it go from that to then hiring the specialists? Or saying we need a kids leader versus we need someone who can also do pastorals, who can also do a bit of preaching, who can also do a bit of like...
Totally.
So walk us through like, sort of your experience. When did you find that transition happening?
Sure. I think kind of underpinning that a little bit, what I love when a staff has a particularly clear set of values that supports the vision of the church. It shouldn't be this other thing that pulls in a different direction, which it can sometimes be. I've seen churches where the organizational element becomes the point. You know, it's so produced and it's so slick and it's so, whether it's more like a mall or whether it's more like a corporate in terms of their staff culture and stuff, and we know that that's not the point. We know that the staff exists to build the mission and vision. Having great cultural stuff, for example, we believe in being called before we're employed, so that sense of calling and character, which is unique to the Christian world. We normally go competency and chemistry are probably it. So our sense of calling in this thing is helpful up front, because we're going to have people who read their seasons better, and so for example Matt going, as a generalist, I'm no longer the best person to do this, God's moving me on, is a whole lot easier conversation than when I don't need that job and I'm there because I need the job. So from day one, if you start with because you have to start with generalists. If you're a staff of 2 or 3 people, you can't hire someone who can only do one thing, because you just can't do that as a church. So you hire a generalist with the thing of, you may grow to be a specialist in something. I accidentally find out that I absolutely love communications internally and externally, and I love building staff culture, healthy staff, figuring out what people are called to. I didn't start knowing that. I started in tech stuff or whatever as a generalist. But consistently people have conversations about what God's saying, what's the next chapter. So I would say early on, the smaller you are, the more generalized. At some point, you do reach the size where actually it is a financial person, and that's what they do. Or it is a kids person, and that's all they do. Or it is even a tech person or worship person or whatever. At that point, the need to dial up the calling conversation is more, not less. Because it's so easy to go, wow, this matches my skill set perfectly, and I can go, it is purely a job, where we hope we will be fighting that in every size of our organization. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah.
My question is from a side of wanting. So I'm thinking of church which is very low cost, low, not many staff on it.
Yes.
All elders not on staff, things like that. And I'm thinking which staff are essential in order to run a church.
Yeah.
Because you may,
Question.
what are the essential staff or the essential skill sets that you need for the staff? So if I get someone who can do 3 of these things, great. What are the essential things that you need?
Fantastic. I think really helpful to go, there isn't a paid staff role that is essential. You can have every single person bivocational or working full-time somewhere and with a sense of calling to this and doing it on volunteer time. And why that's important is because then you can start to look not at the staff member but the role.
Yes.
So what do we believe the New Testament church needs to be able to start like that, a little bit organic and grassroots and then go. So filling the roles, more important than filling the staff titles. Over time, you can see, I'm sure, how as there gets more and more opportunity to be paid full-time for the work that the main leader is doing or that the administrator is doing, whatever, is great, but let's think through the lens of roles. Did Ryan talk about the CIA model or the VIA model?
Yeah.
So I buy into it hugely. We adopted it at Olive Tree when we were there. It feels like someone who carries the vision and is able to communicate that regularly and whose job it is or who has the value and the time carved out to pursue God and to get into Scripture and to be that person who's leading it and empower others to do it. It's just a no-brainer. That's the first thing. The next thing then, if we're going through vision, strategy, culture kind of thing, it does make sense that someone who's able to take the vision into a little bit of strategy, which is your implementer, and be a bit of a translation to your volunteers, to any other staff that you do have, to your lay leaders, all that sort of stuff. And then thirdly, I would say that administration help is great. I know that the better reading of Acts 6 is a response to injustice and multiculturalism of the church, but I think there's also something in there to be said for a thing of let us devote ourselves to prayer and to preaching and ministry, and let's kind of, where the church is grown enough that we can raise up these people to be able to do stuff that might look menial, but it's actually crucial to the health of the church. And so they raise up people full of the Holy Spirit to go and, I guess, deacon and to distribute and to ensure that the culture's good, while they kind of, the things that the apostles were doing, they now no longer do because the church has grown. I think there's a good principle in there about fellowship and raising up leaders as well. In terms of what's essential, in what order, it so depends. Are you in a place where you're reaching a whole lot of students and young adults or young marrieds, or are you in a place where you're reaching a whole lot of elderly? Or is it families? And if it's families, you've got to have someone who's teaching the kids about Jesus, right? Do you have someone who's able to lead us in worship and prayer? And so it really does depend in the next bit of order. I would say though, in a lot of contexts where it's not going to be possible to just keep adding staff, beautifully, I think we're forced into the position of going, we're going to be volunteer driven. We're going to trust in the priesthood of all believers, where people are able to actually contribute and serve, open their homes, open their finances, open their calendars, and give of their best towards the well-being of the church. And so then it's who's the volunteer who can lead worship, who's the volunteer who can help lead kids, all that sort of stuff. Does that make sense? Great question.
The thing on culture, Matt, in the staff team, can you just like double click more on it?
Cool. What do I mean by culture? So I guess it's the how are things done around here? Like, are we really fast and efficient, and that's what we're known for? Are we known for our sincerity and connection? Are we known for our creativity? Are we known for our excellence? What are we known for? How are things done around here? And the best way to get a read on culture is to ask the people who aren't paying the salaries but who are getting paid. If you want to find out, you can go and there's a bunch of beautiful tools around to go, hey, do people know if they're doing a good job? Are they happy to be working there? Do they feel like they call before they're employed? One of the tools we use is something called the Gallup 12 questions. Have you heard about that in the last couple of days? Great thing in America. If you Google Gallup 12, Gallup 12, these are 12 questions you can ask your staff every year in any organization to get a gauge for how actually are they doing. And it should be confidential, not anonymous, but confidential. So things like, I know what is expected of me at work. I completely agree, I kind of agree, or I disagree. Do I know what my job is? I have what I need to do my job. I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. Someone's given me praise or recognition in the last week. Someone cares about my development. My opinion seems to count. The purpose of my company or church makes me feel my job is important. 12 great questions that will really tell you, are people leading in? I won't go through all of them. That thing of culture eats strategy for breakfast. What is your culture? I would start with, you know, the vision of your church. The next really helpful thing is to get some staff values that you buy into. And here's 2 wrong ways to come up with staff values. One is, let's just summarize who we are. Because values need to be who we are and what we aspire to, right? So that whole thing of if people join with there's 3 or 4 staff members, they're going to think, I should always be able to talk to the pastor for 2 hours a day. That's normal. But when you're a church of thousands or when you're a church in multiple cities, that's not going to be realistic. So what are some aspirational values and some who we are values that can get thrown in the mix? So number 1, don't just say who we are. Number 2, don't try to come up with values to correct something that's broken. So a lot of companies or organizations do this. Let's try and, there's a whole lot of problem of being dishonest. So let's say integrity is our value, and hopefully that'll fix the problem. What we should do is go, what do we as a church believe is beautiful? That's the kind of, if we have these kind of people working in this kind of way, we're going to fulfill the strategies that get us to the mission or the vision of God. And so can I give you 2 examples from the last 2 churches that I've worked at? Will that be helpful?
Yeah.
Cool. Common Ground has a clear vision statement or mission statement. We want to fill the city of Cape Town with the life, message and fame of Jesus. We love Cape Town to be full of the life of Jesus, of the message of Jesus, the gospel, and of the fame of Jesus, that he's the Lord. And so we've got 5 staff values that you probably wouldn't hear some of them in other organizations. Number 1, Christ is central. That's our core value that we believe in. Because why? Well, if anything else starts at number 1, we might as well be making money for somebody, or we might as well be, making shoes or whatever it is. Are those bad things? No, but for our church, Christ is central. Number 2, we're here to serve, which changes the way I do stuff. I'm not here to earn, I'm not here to get promoted, I'm not here to build my kingdom, I'm here to serve. Number 3, we are better together. In other words, me plus you in the room is better than just me in the room or just you in the room. Number 4, we want to mobilize others. Isn't this quite unique? If you think about staff members who are thinking from day 1, my job is to mobilize others. Fantastic for your volunteer problem. Hey, my job is not just to get it done. If I just keep doing it for 2 years, I'm not mobilizing anybody. Who can I mobilize to do this, to step into the priesthood of all believers, to step into their role? And how can I work myself out of a role? It's a unique question that we've got in our mix. Because when people do that, generally your bosses go, wow, that person replaced themselves. What can we find for them next? But in a lot of organizations, that would be a negative thing. And the last one is keep it fresh. We don't just want to do the same thing over and over again. That's Common Ground. The last church I was at, called Olive Tree, had 4 key values. We enjoy God. We love people. We want to release potential. We want to impact community. Those are the 4 key statements, and then we unpacked them a little bit. And so a couple of values that stand out to me. I mentioned one already. I'm called before I'm employed. How wonderful it is to sit at a staff review every year, or to sit over a coffee every month with people and go, how are you feeling about calling? What's God saying about you and your future and what you wired to do? Not just, here's the job stuff that we talk about over and over. Another one that I loved was, as a staff, we actively pursue relational health. That means when something's funky, when something's broken, we move towards it, not away from it. When there's a tension between me and Garth, we don't leave the tension to build and build and build. Why? Because that's the kind of thing that's a distraction from the mission for pastors. We don't think like employees, we don't think like bosses, and so what we want is a staff team who's so on board with the vision, and so on board with the mission, that we're running together. It doesn't feel like they're handbraking or pulling by having little fallouts, or by having submissions, or by putting my kingdom ahead of the church's kingdom. You understand why, if you don't have a good culture and have a handle on how you as a boss and employer, because you're the only one who can do it, can build a good culture, it becomes a handbrake rather than an accelerator. And I'd love that you're working in an organization with staff where everyone's running in the same direction, and you see your staff as contributors and accelerators to the vision and strategy, and that because the culture is good, and not you find yourself going, oh, flip, I've got to go talk to that person about their job again, I've got to talk to that person about their attitude again. And so that kind of comes into who we hire, the kind of questions we ask up front, what we expect of people. Are they clear on what they do? Do they know they're doing a good job? Do they have what they need? Because you solve those things, and you'll run fast together and play happy football and all my mixed sporting analogies. Is that helpful? Cool, we've got 6 minutes, so I think we'll do 1 or 2 more questions, maybe 1 more question, and then call it a day.
So you're planning a church, you're getting into a community where there isn't much skills or money. So it's not like in the burbs, or maybe there's a photographer that you can use, voluntary, and you want to plant this thing and you want to do this thing well. And you know what you want to do, but the other people don't have the potential or the skills to get this train moving quickly and well. What would you advise?
So I'd give myself permission to move at the right speed that God grows us at, not at the speed I'd like, because I know that I'm prone towards fast and quick, and I know that that's not always good. It can be, if God's in it. It can be very bad. But if it's kind of my speed over anything else, then what I'll do is I'll start to supplement or pick or import stuff that is unhelpful, unrealistic, and isolates people. That's the first thing. I'd go, God, your permission for you to grow this at your speed. And the second thing I'd do is I'd coach my own heart. They may not have the skill, they definitely have the potential. And how do I know that? Well, I believe in Imago Dei. Every person in this neighborhood is created in the image of God, so there's raw potential. I believe in the active redemptive work of the Holy Spirit and Christ, so they're getting better and better, more and more like themselves. And probably, if they're not leaning into that, no one's ever told them that. So I'd love to give them the gospel that goes, man, you were so separated from God and in your junk. But you weren't just forgiven to 0, you were given the plus 100 of Jesus' life. All his creativity, all his tenderness, all his compassion, all his skill and ability. We've been blessed with every spiritual blessing, right, in the heavenly realm in Christ Jesus. Everyone's a 10 somewhere. I'm going to be a potential releaser. I'm going to be a miner of potential of who that person is meant to be in Christ. And you do some hard yards up front, work closely with those core people, your elders, your staff, your key deacons and leaders, and keep telling them that. Keep telling them about what they'd be without Christ and the good news of what they are in Christ, Colossians 1, Colossians 3. And you'll start to see over time flourishing, beautiful, beautiful flourishing. And I think you'll probably realize there wasn't skill when I started, but there was potential. Now there's skill and even more potential. And you'll be amazed when you go into areas of a lack of creativity or a lack of great theology or a leadership vacuum, and you start to switch that stuff on, people come crawling out of the woodworks because it's some of the most attractive stuff about Christ. Like, he actually helps me find what I'm meant to be. I don't stay in poverty of any sort. I actually come out having been blessed and having be wealthy in my spirit, you know. So those are the 2 things I do. Go at God's pace and keep coaching my heart about how I see not problems but future solutions, you know.
So I want to teach the Bible, so now I've got to be able to lead an organization.
Yeah, or you got to give people permission to do it. So I think you'll figure out if you're the main guy at some point, or Jesus is the main guy, you're the person that he's trusting with whatever church. What can you do? What are you good at? And over time, you're going to have to start a generous as well. You set up the tables and maybe you switch on the sound machine, and that's beautiful because God teaches you stuff in that season that you want to bank for life. But at some point, man, I want to act sixless. I want to, whether it's addressing a problem or whether it's empowering someone else, I do actually want to give myself more to the things that I feel called to. Who am I giving permission and mandate to go and run and do it? It doesn't have to necessarily be you, but whoever you empower to do it, the rest of the people in the room have got to know that you've given God that position, you've given him that space to play. I love playing that space. I'm out calling right now, because how can I serve as many key congregation leaders and church planners as possible by doing stuff that's great that they don't have to worry about it. So if I can help look after their staff, come up with great design or communications to do it, to supplement their preaching and leading and eldering, geez, God, let me do that for as many years as possible, you know. So you might find one of me. I'll come. Let me know, and I'll come. Last question.
So one of the worst things I'd imagine is having someone who has a great interview and then hiring them, finding that they actually just don't fulfill what you thought they were going to.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes if someone's got a good track record, you can just ask references, but you don't always get these opportunities. What are some of the tools you use to discern whether someone's not just a great interviewer, but can actually do what you want them to do?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I've had experience before of hiring very close friends that then I had to fire. That the one in particular, there's still strained relationship, and I've done what I can to try and redeem it. And we were very close, and my poor leadership broke relationship. So I feel it quite tenderly. Economic realities and stuff mean that sometimes you're offboarding people as much as you're onboarding, and then the reality of this person seemed great, and they came along and there was either a shadow mission, they were building their own thing, or there was a character default that you didn't pick up in a few hours of interview and a couple of competency tests. The short answer is pray for discernment, because we do have one tool that other employers don't have. God actually, would you share stuff? Secondly, Taryn mentioned it earlier, do I know anyone who knows them? And are they willingly give me permission to phone a couple of, whose life group are they in, whose church were they at before, where did they work? And are they jumping at the prospect of me phoning the people in their life? And then thirdly, how much vulnerability and authenticity do they have? Can they talk about their junk? Can they talk about their weakness? Can they talk about their sin and how they've submitted it to Jesus and let people correct them? Because they're on a trajectory, and likely them starting this job is not going to suddenly switch them onto a new trajectory. They're probably going to hopefully go up and to the right in our organization, but they're going to carry on. So if they've had a track record of going, man, I really messed that up, and I learned a lot along the way, and I didn't do this well, and this person had to shout, and if they can do that, they're modeling what it's like to not yet be Christ, and they probably have the confidence to be able to speak that stuff out. So 3 things: discernment that God's given us, character witnesses around that I will do my homework, and thirdly, just are they willing to go there in terms of their shadow side? It's not just sin, it's sin and it's history stuff, it's weakness, and knowing what they aren't. So some of that self-awareness stuff that I'm sure Ryan talked about and that we will talk about tomorrow is really helpful as well.